A tech genius is dead. An AI warned him days before it happened. And now, the algorithm has gone silent. In a world ruled by data and secrets, one man follows the logic, even when it's buried beneath lies, deepfakes, and fear. This is the algorithm of the Baskervilles, a modern detective thriller inspired by Sherlock Holmes, but written for the age of artificial intelligence. If you love gripping stories, conspiracies, and clever twists, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment letting us know your favorite moment. It was on a rain-lashed Tuesday in late November that the affair began. I had just returned from my morning rounds, my coat soaked through, when I found Mr. Sherlock Holmes deep in contemplation at our Baker Street apartment. His long fingers steepled and his eyes fixed not upon me, but upon the man seated across from him. The visitor was a gentleman of no inconsiderable nervous disposition, thin to the point of fragility, with spectacles that danced upon the bridge of his nose each time he spoke. "You must forgive me, Mr. Holmes," said he, "if I appear agitated. The events of the past week have unsettled many, but to me, who knew Charles Baskerville as a colleague and friend, they have struck to the very core." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "Dr. Mortimer, you mentioned in your message that Mr. Baskerville's death, while officially attributed to cardiac arrest, bore unusual circumstances?" "Indeed," Mortimer said, producing from his attaché a slim, polished tablet. He tapped the screen, and a photo appeared, the image of a man collapsed just outside a sleek glass building. His lifeless body lay near a sculpture bearing the name Baskerville AI. Holmes took the tablet, examining the photo with fastidious care. No signs of violence. No one else in frame. "Tell me, this sculpture, is it of significance?" "It marks the entrance to the company," said Mortimer. "It was designed by Charles himself. He believed symbols mattered, that branding, as he often said, should inspire awe." Holmes smiled faintly, curious that awe and fear are often close cousins. I leaned forward. "You believe this death was not natural?" "Perhaps it was," Mortimer replied quickly, "but it followed weeks of strange occurrences, malfunctioning servers, threats from an anonymous email account, whispers among employees that the company's prized algorithm, codenamed Project H.O.U.N.D, had become unpredictable." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Project Hound, you say?" "Yes, predictive AI platform. The very thing Charles was to unveil this month. The technology could anticipate human behavior by analyzing digital footprints. An algorithm capable of identifying risk factors before a crime occurred, or so they claimed. Holmes set the tablet down. "You understand, Dr. Mortimer, that I am not in the habit of pursuing shadows cast by marketing departments. If there is a crime, I must see evidence of it." "Then allow me to provide it," said Mortimer. "I do not believe Charles died of natural causes, and I believe his heir, Henry Baskerville, may be next." That name seemed to arrest Holmes mid-thought. "Henry Baskerville, the young software engineer from Toronto, correct? I recall he was brought in for the company's ethics committee last quarter." "Precisely. He is now the principal shareholder, and he is receiving the same threats Charles did before he died." Holmes stood and walked to the window, the drizzle beyond painting the glass with melancholy streaks. "Well then," he said, turning back, his tone alight with purpose. "Dr. Watson, pack for warmer climes. We are going to Silicon Valley." Our arrival at the San Francisco International Airport was marked by a palpable sense of contrast. The foggy melancholy of London had given way to a dry, clinical brightness. Sunlight poured over the mirrored facades of buildings like liquid steel, and even the air seemed curated, filtered and sterilized for consumption. A private car was waiting for us, sleek and self-driving. It bore the minimalist logo of Baskerville AI, a stylized hound, rendered in 3 geometric strokes. Holmes regarded it with mild amusement. "Interesting," he murmured, settling into the seat. 3 lines to convey loyalty, obedience, and, perhaps unintentionally, menace. "You see menace in everything," I said. "Not everything," he replied, looking out the window. "Only in things that are profitable to conceal." We drove southward, past the great tech citadels that rose like glass cathedrals over an empire of code. The Baskerville AI campus came into view at the edge of Palo Alto, a cluster of matte black structures, their windows tinted to a perfect opacity, surrounded by an immaculately trimmed expanse of synthetic grass. Waiting at the entrance was a young man in his late 20s, dressed simply in jeans and a navy blazer, his posture somewhere between confidence and caution. He extended a hand as we approached. "Mr. Holmes? Dr. Watson? I'm Henry. Thank you for coming." Holmes shook the hand but said nothing at first. He merely studied the young man with narrowed eyes. "You're thinner than your photographs," he said at last. "Poor appetite? Or poor sleep?" Henry blinked. "Both, I suppose." "Then you are already in danger," Holmes replied. "Lead us in." The lobby was silent and cold. Screens pulsed on the walls, showing rotating visuals of AI workflows, neural nodes lighting up like constellations. A sculpture of the Hound logo towered over us, its smooth surface catching the sun like a blade. "Charles believed in symbolism," Henry said, catching my gaze. "He thought the Hound was the perfect metaphor for what our system could become: loyal, precise, relentless. But now, you fear it's turned on its master?" Holmes interjected. "I fear someone has turned it against him." We ascended via biometric elevator to the executive floor. There, Henry ushered us into a private conference room whose glass walls turned opaque as the door closed. "3 days before my uncle died," he began, "our internal QA logs were compromised. Someone accessed the project kernel, the part of the algorithm that determines behavioral risk assessments." "From inside the building?" Holmes asked. Henry nodded. "Yes, whoever it was covered their tracks well. But the system began flagging unusual predictions. One of them was Charles." Watson furrowed his brow. "You mean the AI predicted his death?" Henry hesitated. "Predicted risk of harm, but the language was vague. Elevated hostility indicators, whatever that means. Charles thought it was nonsense. But then, he collapsed." Holmes leaned forward, folding his hands. "And now," said Henry, "the board wants to push the launch forward. Investors are demanding results. And someone, I don't know who, wants me dead or discredited." Holmes was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, voice low and cool. "Dr. Watson, note the timeline. Code breach, internal flagging, death, and now threats to the air. Motive is layered, but clear." He turned to Henry. "Mr. Baskerville, I will need full access to your system logs, employee files, and security footage. Also, a list of everyone who stood to gain from your uncle's death." Henry looked pale but nodded. "I'll get them to you tonight." Holmes rose, walking to the window that overlooked the green facade below. "Technology evolves," he said, "but greed, that remains beautifully constant." It was shortly after dusk when Holmes and I returned to our temporary quarters, a sparse, glass-walled unit adjacent to the Baskerville campus, more resembling a sterilized laboratory than a place of rest. Holmes had declined the executive suite offered to us, stating that the view of the data center would prove more instructive than any luxury mattress. The day's tension still lingered in the air. Holmes sat cross-legged on the floor before a wall-mounted display, examining the metadata logs young Henry had provided. Columns of timestamps, device IDs, and algorithmic outputs flowed across the screen like the hieroglyphics of a civilization both brilliant and cursed. I poured 2 cups of bitter hotel coffee and handed him one. "This Project H.O.U.N.D, I said. "You've barely commented on it. And yet it seems to be at the center of all this." He took a sip, then spoke without turning. "Because it is not a thing, Watson. It is an idea wrapped in a skin of code. And ideas, unlike machines, have a far more dangerous reach." I waited. "Tell me," he continued, now rising to his feet, "if I gave you access to every social media post, every purchase, every keystroke of an individual for 5 years, could you, with any certainty, divine their moral compass?" I shook my head. "No one could." "And yet," Holmes said, eyes gleaming, "this algorithm attempts precisely that. It assigns values to behaviors, weights to tendencies, and outputs a threat index, a number meant to quantify human unpredictability. But here's the true horror. People believe it." He tapped the screen, enlarging a specific segment of log entries. "Look here. 2 weeks before Charles's death, the system began issuing high-risk flags, not just for him, but for anyone who challenged the project's timeline." I leaned closer. The names were anonymized, but one note read, "Subject 014, elevated aggression detected. Recommendation, observe for destabilizing influence." "And these recommendations?" I asked. Holmes replied, "Sent to upper management, including Charles." A silence fell between us, broken only by the hum of a nearby server cluster. "That's not a flaw," I said, half to myself. "That's a warning system." Holmes turned to me, his voice measured. "It's a myth, Watson. The myth of the ever-knowing machine. And someone in that building is wielding it like a leash. A hound, trained to bark when it's told, and bite when it must." Just then, a soft chime interrupted us. A message from Henry. "Holmes, just found this buried in a shared drive. Thought you'd want to see it. No metadata, no trace. Attached was an image. Grainy, distorted, clearly from a security camera. But there, standing outside the server room at 2:37 a.m., a figure in a black hoodie, face obscured, crouched before the access panel." Holmes zoomed in. The ID badge on the figure's lanyard had been deliberately smudged. Yet one thing stood out with clarity. On the back of their laptop, in matte white letters, "Hound 0. Holmes straightened. "Watson," he said quietly, "we are no longer hunting a saboteur. We are chasing a ghost that lives in the machine, and someone is feeding it stories to tell." The following morning began not with the clatter of footsteps or the rattle of a breakfast tray, but with a phone vibrating insistently on the glass desk beside Holmes. He answered it with one word. "Yes." Pause. "Secure the logs. Tell no one else. We'll be there in 10 minutes. He ended the call and looked at me. "The servers are down." I stared at him. Again. "Not merely down," Holmes replied, already tying his laces with mechanical precision. "Wiped. Redundant backups failed simultaneously. A digital execution, clinical and well-timed. Come, Watson. The Hound has bitten." We were at the data center before the first shift arrived. A narrow corridor led to a vault-like chamber filled with quiet machines, or what had once been quiet. Now they blinked red and blue in discordant rhythm, like an ambulance had crashed into a cathedral. Henry met us there, pale and disheveled. His voice was taut with disbelief. "Everything is gone. Not just the kernel, but the internal test datasets, behavioral modeling files, years of curated input." Holmes knelt before one of the open server bays, studying the twisted tangle of fiber lines. "Tell me," he asked, not looking up, Who had physical access to this room in the last 24 hours? Only security, Henry replied, and the AI team. All entries are logged. Biometric scan, keycard, timestamp. It should be traceable. Holmes stood. Not if the sabotage occurred through the system itself. Henry blinked. You mean remote execution? Holmes nodded slowly. 2 nights ago, we observed a figure near this room, Hound 0, as the laptop suggested. But this is not a lone vandal. It required access to the central authentication module. Someone inside has administrative clearance. At that moment, a junior technician approached, holding a tablet with shaking hands. Sir, I don't know if this is relevant, but I found this hidden in the failover directory. It shouldn't even be there. He handed the device to Henry, who opened the file. It was a short script, lines of Python code with a time trigger and a signature. The signature read, Deaf Howl. Holmes's lips twitched, not with humor, but recognition. This is performance, he said. A display of dominance. A game of signs and shadows. He turned to Henry. You have built a machine that predicts behavior, but you've surrounded it with humans, and humans lie. But why now? Henry asked. Why not wait until the launch? Holmes folded his arms. Because whoever did this does not wish merely to delay the launch. They wish to destroy it, or to take control before it sees the light of public scrutiny. And this was their opening move. Watson looked around the dimmed server room, where the blinking lights no longer indicated activity, but absence. The ghostly silence of machines that once knew too much. And the name of this ghost, I asked, is Hound. No, Holmes replied. That is the name of its mask. The ghost itself that will take longer to unmask. But I assure you, Watson, it has a heartbeat. It was shortly past midday when Holmes requested a private audience with the head of security, a man by the name of Jack Stapleton. The name alone stirred a peculiar association in my mind, though I could not at first recall from where. He arrived punctually, a tall man of indeterminate age, with a soldier's bearing and the deadpan expression of one long accustomed to authority without accountability. We met in the executive observatory, a curved glass chamber overlooking the campus. Holmes, seated beside a projection screen displaying time-stamped surveillance footage, gestured for him to sit. You have military experience, Holmes said plainly. 7 years in tactical cyber defense, Stapleton replied. Classified operations. I was brought in to secure the algorithm, not babysit egos. Then you'll forgive me, Holmes said, for assuming your access logs are impeccable. Stapleton did not blink. They are. Holmes tapped the screen. Except they are not. He played a short clip from 2 nights prior, 2:37 a.m. The footage showed the shadowed figure again, hoodie drawn, crouched before the data center's main panel. There is no entry recorded for this hour. No badge scan. No biometric trace. Stapleton frowned. That's impossible. Every ingress point is independently monitored. And yet, Holmes continued, here is your ghost. The cameras caught what the system conveniently ignored. So either we are dealing with a ghost, or someone rewrote the memory of your building. Stapleton leaned forward. With due respect, Mr. Holmes, we run on triple redundant logs. No single actor could erase all traces unless... He stopped. Holmes finished the sentence for him. Unless they were inside your department. A silence stretched between the three of us. At last Stapleton broke it. Anyone from IT support could have slipped in under the guise of routine diagnostics. We outsource night maintenance. I can get you names. Do so, Holmes said, and include the physical security shift rosters. But tell me, Who among your staff has ever expressed discomfort with Project H.O.U.N.D? Plenty, Stapleton admitted. It frightens people. Too much data, too much power. But none would act against it. They'd lose everything. Holmes rose. People only fear losing what they understand. But give them a system they do not understand, and they begin to believe in ghosts. Stapleton excused himself. When he had gone, I turned to Holmes. You suspect him? I suspect everyone, Holmes said. But Stapleton is too self-assured. He expects us to look for threats in the dark corners of the server room, not in boardrooms. At that moment, Henry re-entered, flanked by two new figures. This is Laura Lyons, he said, and Mr. Franklin. They're both on the leadership team. Laura Lyons was striking, her gaze intelligent, though guarded. She was introduced as the head of product experience. Franklin, older, with a sharp suit and sharper eyes, served as a strategic investor. Holmes offered no pleasantries. Tell me, Miss Lyons, what is your opinion of the algorithm? She blinked. It works. That is not what I asked. She hesitated. It works too well. It sees patterns where none should exist. It flagged me for emotional volatility because I watched a documentary on domestic violence 3 nights in a row. It read intent where there was only empathy. Holmes turned to Franklin. And you, sir? What does your investment buy you? Franklin answered without flinching. Access, insight, control. I didn't put $10 million into this company so it could grow a conscience. Holmes smiled faintly. Then we are closing in, he said to no one in particular. Closing in on what? Asked Henry. Holmes's eyes lingered on the surveillance feed, still frozen at the moment the hooded figure had turned, ever so slightly, toward the camera. The Hound is not chasing us, Holmes said quietly. It is circling and waiting for one of us to run. From the private notes of Dr. John H. Watson, November 18th, Palo Alto. At Holmes's request, or rather, his gentle insistence, I undertook the task of trailing Miss Laura Lyons. My instructions were vague, as his always are when his mind is several steps ahead of my own. Observe her patterns, Watson. She is a woman who speaks truth to the letter but not to the spirit. Lyons left the office at precisely 7:03 p.m., walking with the determined gait of one not wishing to appear hurried. I followed at a distance through the gleaming corridors of downtown Palo Alto, where cafes advertised blockchain loyalty programs and security drones buzzed politely overhead. She did not return to her residence, as I had expected. Instead, she boarded a rideshare vehicle bound for a lesser-known district on the outskirts. It was there that I first grew suspicious. The vehicle stopped before a nondescript co-working space called the Ethics Foundry, a non-profit collective I had seen referenced briefly in Baskervilles' archived emails. It is known for its opposition to predictive surveillance technologies. From behind a tinted cafe window across the street, I observed Laura enter, greeted by 2 men, one older, one impossibly young, both of whom appeared to recognize her well. The 3 disappeared into a glass-walled conference room, and the door sealed behind them. The lights inside dimmed, and a large screen flickered to life. Though I could not hear what was said, the body language was unmistakable. Intensity, urgency, secrecy. I waited for nearly 2 hours. When she emerged, her face bore the strain of conviction. A woman not distressed, but driven. She made no effort to return discreetly. If she noticed me in the crowd, she gave no sign. It was only upon returning to the hotel that the true chill set in. I had not noticed it until I reached the lift. A small, square envelope, unmarked, tucked under the door of my suite. There was no seal. Inside, written in precise block letters, was a single message. You followed the wrong ghost. Keep walking and you'll be next. I admit to a moment of real dread, not of physical harm, but of the sense that we were not the hunters in this affair. We were already inside the cage, and the door had been closed. I showed the note to Holmes, who took it with a thin smile. "Excellent," he murmured. "The hound bares its teeth." "Holmes," I said, "I don't like this. Someone knows our movements." "Of course they do," he replied, tossing the envelope aside. "They built the system that watches everyone else. Why wouldn't they turn it on us?" He returned to his laptop, where lines of intercepted server code scrolled down the screen like digital rainfall. "And what of Miss Lyons?" I asked. "She is not our culprit," Holmes said without turning. "But she may become our conscience." That night, I slept with the curtains drawn and the hallway light on, a habit I had thought long buried since the Afghan campaigns. Yet something about this case gnawed at me. Not just the secrecy, the sabotage, or the threats. It was the creeping suspicion that Holmes, brilliant though he was, had for the first time underestimated the danger not of a person, but of an idea. It was late in the evening when Holmes summoned me with a single knock on the adjoining wall between our rooms. A knock that spoke neither of urgency nor invitation, but of inevitability. I found him seated in the dark, the glow of 3 screens casting his face in shifting patterns of green and blue. His hands were folded beneath his chin, eyes sharp and entirely absent of fatigue. "You've not slept," I remarked. "Sleep is a luxury, Watson," he replied. "And we are in the midst of a counterfeit reality." He turned the central monitor toward me. It displayed a paused video, the face of Charles Baskerville, unmistakably alive, speaking with solemnity and poise in what appeared to be a recent company-wide message. "Impossible," I whispered. "He died 2 weeks ago." "Precisely," said Holmes. "And yet this video was distributed internally 4 days ago, through a restricted Slack channel titled Hound Ghost. Observe." He pressed play. The late Charles Baskerville stared into the camera, his voice calm but resolute. "There are those within this organization who fear what Project H.O.U.N.D will reveal. They will attempt to delay us, to discredit the work. Do not listen to them. Trust the data. Trust the system. Trust the Hound." Holmes paused the video. "Now," he said, drawing up 2 tabs side by side. One the video, the other a frame-by-frame scan. "Watch closely." He ran a spectral analysis. There, ever so slight, was a stutter in the eye movement. Then the blink rate. Then the micromuscle twitch delay around the lips. "A deepfake," I breathed. Holmes nodded. "Flawless to the casual observer. But to a trained eye or a paranoid one, the deception collapses." He clicked again. Metadata flashed on the screen. "Routed through a temporary proxy. Origin server. Untraceable." But whoever created this had access to terabytes of Charles's vocal recordings, facial scans, and biometric data, all of which are housed internally at Baskerville AI. So someone inside faked a message from a dead man to manipulate the staff, I said. "Not merely to manipulate," Holmes corrected. "To command obedience. The ghost of Charles has become a weapon, a symbol designed to silence dissent and accelerate the launch. I can think of only one motive. Profit." "No," Holmes said grimly. "Control." He tapped open another file, a log of server changes issued after the deepfake message was circulated. Within 2 hours of this video being viewed, 3 engineers altered core safeguards in the algorithm, removing its ethical compliance thresholds. Can now operate without constraint. I felt my mouth go dry. "You mean?" "I mean the system can now flag a person as a threat without disclosing why or how. No explanations. No appeals. Just a number." Holmes stood, pacing. "We are no longer dealing with sabotage. This is ideological. Someone believes that control of fear is a form of justice. A knock interrupted us. It was Henry, visibly shaken, holding a printed memo. "This was slipped under my door just now," he said. I think it's meant to rattle me." Holmes took the paper, eyes scanning quickly. It read, "The Hound runs better without a leash. The board agrees. Back down or you will join Charles in silence." Holmes looked up. "They've weaponized both man and myth, Watson. The algorithm is no longer just code. It is becoming doctrine. If the enemy had been faceless before, it now showed teeth." At precisely 3:18 p.m., just as the Baskerville board convened to discuss delaying the launch of Project H.O.U.N.D, a sudden alarm rang through the executive floor, not from a firewall breach, nor from a surveillance trigger, but from the eastern wing of the campus, where the engineers worked in open-concept quietude. Smoke rose not in billows, but in a calculated spiral, thin, sharp, deliberate. By the time Holmes and I reached the scene, the fire suppression systems had activated, coating the area in a sterile fog of gas and halon. Engineers coughed behind emergency masks, while an emergency robot trundled across the floor, flashing a cautionary message. "Thermal overload. Device breach. Isolate and report." At the center of it all lay the charred remains of a Baskerville-issue development laptop. Henry Baskerville stood a few paces away, his hands trembling as he stared at the smoking wreckage. "It was mine," he said softly. "That was my prototype terminal." Holmes knelt beside it without hesitation. He retrieved the twisted casing with gloved hands and examined the remains with clinical calm. "No battery failure," he murmured. "The explosion was internal, but not accidental. Someone embedded a micro-trigger within the cooling system. Smart, precise, not designed to destroy, but to intimidate." Henry looked stricken. "They're trying to kill me." "No," Holmes replied, standing. "If they wanted you dead, they would not have announced themselves with smoke and warning sirens. They want you afraid, discredited, confused, isolated." That evening, the boardroom turned cold. Holmes, though invited to present his findings, was politely, and then firmly, asked to leave the meeting midway through. Stapleton cited external interference in an internal matter, and Franklin nodded along with his hawk-like certainty. Laura Lyons was conspicuously silent. We waited outside in the hallway as muffled voices rose and fell behind the closed glass doors. Holmes stood motionless, staring into the patterned grain of the hardwood wall. "This is how they do it," he said almost to himself. "They sow doubt. They fracture trust. And then they turn the pieces against one another." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "We can bring the footage, the logs, the deepfake evidence. They must listen." Holmes shook his head. "They already believe the Hound is loyal to them. They cannot admit it slipped the leash." Moments later, Henry emerged from the boardroom, his face ashen. "They voted to resume the launch schedule," he said. "Expedited review. No external oversight." Holmes looked at him. "You mean they voted to unleash a weapon and hope it only bites their enemies?" Henry didn't answer. For the first time since the case began, I saw something flicker behind Holmes's eyes. Not despair, exactly, but the acknowledgement of a retreat, a tactical withdrawal. The master of deduction had been outmaneuvered, not by logic, but by politics, by fear wrapped in profit. That night, Holmes said very little. He sat beside the hotel window, the city of glass and code glittering beyond, and lit a rare cigarette, not for stimulation, but for ritual. "The dog," he said quietly, "has stopped barking." It was not until the following afternoon, in the quiet of what ought to have been resignation, that Holmes began to pace. He did so without sound. barefoot on the concrete floor of our minimalist lodging, back and forth before a wall of notes and server logs. His eyes unfocused, his mind, I knew, terribly precise. I had seen the behavior before. In times of greatest complexity, Holmes did not chase facts, but listened for patterns, and the silence between them. "You said something last night, Watson," he murmured suddenly, without turning. "You said the system no longer barks." "Yes," I replied. "You said it yourself. The Hound had gone quiet." He nodded slowly. "But that makes no sense. Why would they sabotage the primary server, fake messages from the dead, send threats to the air, only to stop?" He turned to me, eyes alight. "Unless," he said, "the Hound is no longer here." I blinked. "You mean?" "They moved it. The real H.O.U.N.D, the algorithm, the behavioral engine. It's not on Baskervilles network anymore. That's why the system stopped responding. Not because it was silenced, but because it relocated." He sprang into motion. "Quickly, Watson. We must speak with Mortimer. Now." Dr. Mortimer received us in the legal office adjoining the company grounds, a place filled with binders, contract relics, and the musty odor of paperwork no AI had dared to digitize. "Mr. Holmes," he said nervously, "I assumed you'd been dismissed." "Only from the boardroom," Holmes replied. "Not from the truth. Now tell me, when Charles Baskerville was alive, did he ever mention a contingency site? An off-campus backup facility? Anything not listed in the official disaster protocol?" Mortimer looked hesitant. Then, slowly, he reached into a drawer and produced a single brass key on a chain. It was old, by corporate standards, with a stamped label, "Storage B2, redundant node." "He made me promise never to mention it," Mortimer said. "Said it was insurance." The facility lay 15 miles east of the campus, a rented space in an otherwise abandoned industrial park, marked only by a rusting keypad and a biometric scanner nearly obscured by ivy. Inside was darkness, chilled air, and the humming of machines not meant to be heard. Holmes unlocked the steel cage and stepped in. There, stacked like tombs, were 4 cold storage servers, each marked simply H.O.U.N.D, Beta 01 through H.O.U.N.D, Beta 04. Holmes powered one. Lights danced. And then, on a flickering monitor, a terminal came to life. A console prompt blinked, then printed a line. "Welcome back, Charles. Threat index." Recalibrating. I felt a chill. Holmes moved swiftly, accessing directories, opening logs. "This is it," he said. "The original build, unaltered, untainted. And here," he pointed to a sequence of commit notes, "is proof that the mainline version at Baskerville HQ diverged from this fork 6 days before Charles died." He opened the final commit. It read, "Correction of prediction bias. Flag manipulation by external agent suspected. Launch postponed." Holmes turned to me. His expression was not victory, but vindication. Charles discovered the sabotage. He removed the original, hid it here, but before he could act publicly, someone ensured he never would. My voice was dry. "And the version now running the company is a weaponized clone, trained to obey command, not truth." Holmes stood, eyes narrowed. "But with this," he said, placing his hand gently atop the cold server, "we have the real Hound, not the ghost they used to frighten children, but the creature Charles tried to protect, the creature that knows who tampered with its mind." The board of Baskerville AI had reconvened that morning for what was to be a ceremonial green light, a vote of confidence in the final build of Project H.O.U.N.D, complete with press statements, investor smiles, and an impending announcement to the market. Holmes and I arrived precisely 3 minutes before the vote. The security at reception had not been instructed to stop us. A grave oversight on the part of those who believed the truth could be buried beneath quarterly optimism. The boardroom was its usual theater of glass, sleek lines, and data projections. Around the long table sat the same familiar faces. Franklin, cool and clinical. Laura Lyons, visibly pale. Stapleton, ever unreadable. And Henry, distant now, worn, isolated among vultures. The moment Holmes entered, silence fell. "I will be brief," he said, his voice even deliberate. "The system you are about to launch is not Charles Baskervilles' algorithm. It is a forgery, altered by someone within this room." Franklin scoffed. "This again? Mr. Holmes, I thought your services had been terminated." Holmes interrupted, smiling faintly. "Yes, and quite conveniently. Just days before we uncovered H.O.U.N.D. Beta 04, the original codebase hidden off campus. He placed a portable drive on the table. This contains the last authenticated build of Project H.O.U.N.D, signed and timestamped by Charles himself. Included within are commit notes indicating that he discovered tampering, alterations to the system's risk predictions, and chose to halt the launch." Stapleton's jaw tightened. Holmes continued. "He was silenced before he could speak. In his place, someone deepfaked a message to rally loyalty and override doubt. And then the final blow, a symbolic act of violence against Henry's laptop, staged as an accident, but executed with the elegance of a military deterrent." His eyes turned to Stapleton. "You, sir, are the only one here with the technical skill, operational access, and training in psychological pressure required to carry out such a campaign." Stapleton said nothing. Holmes pivoted. "But you did not act alone." He turned to Franklin. "You stood to lose the most from Charles's ethical delay. The valuation of this company, your personal fortune, your backdoor agreements with third-party security contractors, all tied to a timeline that Charles sought to disrupt." Holmes pressed a button on his tablet. A recording played, an intercepted Zoom call, its video obscured, but voice unmistakable. "If the system can't bark when we want it to, then we replace it. Charles is sentimental. The board wants results." Franklin stood. "This is inadmissible. This," Holmes said, "is undeniable." Holmes looked to Laura Lyons. "You knew. Not at first, but you suspected. Your silence was not cowardice, but paralysis. The paralysis of someone who realizes they are standing beside a cliff, and the wind has already shifted." She lowered her head. Henry rose. His voice was quiet but clear. "We will halt the launch, effective immediately. The original system will be independently audited. And as interim CEO, I am ordering a full investigation." Franklin stepped forward. "You have no authority." "I have the truth," Henry replied, "and the servers to prove it." Security was called. Stapleton did not resist. He looked at Holmes once, his eyes devoid of anger, only admiration, begrudging and cold. "You would have made a good tactician," he said. Holmes smiled. "I prefer enemies who don't follow orders." And just like that, the room shifted. The grip of fear that had silently governed every decision began to loosen. The Hound, it seemed, had been called off. The sun had just begun its descent behind the Silicon skyline when we stood once more in the observatory above Baskerville AI, the same room where, mere days before, suspicion had been thick enough to cut. Now it was quiet. Below us, the office lights blinked off one by one, like stars extinguishing themselves. The launch had been halted, servers disconnected, the press briefing canceled with a single, carefully worded memo about unforeseen ethical reviews. Holmes, standing at the glass, folded his arms. "Tell me, Watson," he said, "do you remember the original legend? The Hound. I asked. Yes, a beast, seen only in darkness. A punishment wrapped in fog and fangs. But what truly frightened the people of Dartmoor, I considered, not the hound itself, but the idea of it. The belief that it hunted according to ancient laws, beyond justice, beyond reason. Holmes turned to me, and here too the same thing happened, not with fur and teeth, but with code and data. The board feared losing control of something they thought was theirs. So they fed the fear, created a ghost to enforce obedience. He gestured toward a nearby table, where the untouched deepfake footage still looped in silence. Charles's death did not launch the Hound. His silence did. And in that silence, others wrote the creature's story. Henry entered quietly. He had changed since we first met. Still youthful, but marked now by something harder in the eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or disillusionment. I owe you both more than I can say, he said. We would have launched a system that looked like it knew the truth, but had none of it. You owe Charles, Holmes replied. He built the Hound to see clearly. Others taught it to bite without asking why. Henry approached the original server, now cleaned and backed up, its core algorithm once again intact. I still believe in it, he said, in the potential, but with ethics rebuilt from the ground up. Oversight, transparency. Holmes gave a slight nod. Then it may serve as a guide, not a leash. There was a pause, not uncomfortable. Then Holmes said, the true Hound, Henry, was never a machine. It was the belief that people can be governed better by fear than by reason. But fear is a poor leader. It demands obedience, not understanding. Henry looked down at the blinking lights. Then I suppose the leash belongs on us, not it. Holmes turned to me with the faintest smile. A sound observation. We may yet make a detective of him. Laura Lyons entered shortly after, a file in hand. I've compiled the changes made to the system since Charles's death, she said, avoiding Henry's eyes. We'll need an independent review board. I can help. Henry took the file. Holmes raised an eyebrow but said nothing. As we left the campus, the evening had grown still. The weight of resolution pressed against our shoulders not as victory, but as consequence. On the ride back, Watson turned to Holmes. You refused payment, he said. Again. I did. Why? Holmes looked out at the cold stars above the valley. Because some debts, he said, are not settled with coin, but with the knowledge that the Hound is back in its cage. For now. It was nearly a week later when we boarded the red-eye flight to London. The familiar clatter of luggage wheels and idle chatter, a welcome reprieve from the quiet menace of algorithms and surveillance. Holmes had spoken little since the night of the confrontation, save for a single, precise message he sent to an independent ethics consortium in Geneva. He declined interviews, awards, and, as always, remuneration. He sat now beside me, coat draped neatly across his lap, eyes trained on nothing in particular through the oval window. I opened my notebook. Case summary. Baskerville AI. Status. Resolved. Outcome. Sabotage uncovered. Launch halted. Integrity of original system restored. Casualties, 1 life lost. 1 reputation dismantled. A myth destroyed. You're unusually quiet, I said. Holmes stirred. That is the problem with truth, Watson. When revealed, it tends to leave behind a silence. I leaned back. I suppose you're thinking about Charles. In part, he replied, but also about what we leave behind when we believe ourselves cleverer than consequence. He reached into his coat pocket and removed a small USB drive, the backup of the original algorithm, gifted by Henry in gratitude. I will not keep it, Holmes said. It belongs to those brave enough to govern it with conscience, not to those who understand how to use it. He set the drive on the tray table and folded his hands. Charles built a compass. Others tried to turn it into a cage. And the board? I asked. Under review. Their silence will cost them. It always does, eventually. I nodded. And Henry? Holmes's mouth curled slightly. He is young, but he has seen the Hound unmasked. That changes a man. The flight attendant dimmed the cabin lights. Most passengers leaned into sleep. I thought of the case in full. The fire in the server room, the deepfake whispers, the anonymous threats, the cold facility that hummed with truth when all else lied. I thought of Stapleton's calm malice, Franklin's smug greed, Laura's quiet courage, and of Charles, who had chosen to hide the real Hound rather than let it be turned loose upon the world. Holmes broke the silence. Watson, check your inbox. I did, and there, timestamped just minutes ago, was an email from anonymous@protonmail.com. Subject, echoes in the system. Message, you've caged the Hound, but someone else is already breeding another. I looked up. Holmes met my gaze unshaken. There is no such thing as a final case, he said. Only unfinished ones. Outside the window, the stars over the Atlantic flickered like watchful eyes. Cold, unblinking, eternal. And beneath them, man continued to build machines to understand himself, without yet understanding what he was truly capable of. The truth was never just hidden in code. It was programmed into silence. You've just experienced the algorithm of the Baskervilles, where fear isn't a ghost in the machine. It's the one writing the rules. Let us know in the comments. What would you do if an AI predicted your death? Like this video? Smash that like button. Want more modern mystery stories like this? Subscribe and turn on notifications, new stories every week. Thanks for watching, Detective. Until next time, stay sharp.